October, Smoky Gold. There are two kinds of hunting: ordinary hunting and ruffed grouse hunting. There are two places to hunt grouse: ordinary places and Adams County. There are two times to hunt in Adams: ordinary times and when the tamaracks are smoky gold. This is written for those luckless ones who have never stood, gun empty and mouth agape, to watch the golden needles come sifting down, while the feathery rocket that knocked them off sail unscathed into the jack pines. The tamaracks change from green to yellow when the first frosts have brought woodcock, fox sparrows, and juncos out of the north. Troops of robins are stripping the last white berries from the dogwood thickets, leaving the empty stems as a pink haze against the hill. The creekside alders have shed their leaves, exposing here and there an eyeful of holly. Brambles are aglow, lighting your footsteps grouseward. The dog knows what grouseward is better than you do. You will do well to follow him closely, reading from the cock of his ears and the story the breeze is telling. When at last he stops, stock still, and says with a sideward glance, "Well, get ready." The question is, ready for what? A twittering woodcock? Or the rising roar of a grouse? Or perhaps only a rabbit? In this moment of uncertainty is condensed much of the virtue of grouse hunting. He who must know what to get ready for should go and hunt pheasants. Hunts differ in flavor, but the reasons are subtle. The sweetest hunts are stolen. To steal a hunt, either go far into the wilderness where no one else has been, or else find some undiscovered place under everybody's nose. Few hunters know that grouse exist in Adams County, for when they drive through it, they see only a waste of jack pines and scrub oaks. This is because the highway intersects a series of west-running creeks, each of which heads in a swamp but drops to the river through dry sand barrens. Naturally, the northbound highway intersects these swampless barrens, but just above the highway and behind the screen of dry scrub, every creeklet expands into a broad ribbon of swamp, a sure haven for grouse. Here, come October, I sit in the solitude of my tamaracks and hear the hunters' cars roaring up the highway, hell-bent for the crowded counties to the north. I chuckle as I picture their dancing speedometers, their strained faces, their eager eyes glued on the northward horizon. At the noise of their passing, a cock grouse drums his defiance. My dog grins as we note his direction. That fellow, we agree, needs some exercise. We shall look him up presently. The tamaracks grow not only in the swamp, but at the foot of the bordering upland, where springs break forth. Each spring has become choked with moss, which forms a boggy terrace. I call these terraces the hanging gardens, for out of their sodden muck, the fringed gentians have lifted blue jewels. Such an October gentian, dusted with tamarack gold, is worth a full stop and a long look, even when the dog signals grouse ahead. Between each hanging garden and the creekside is a moss-paved deer trail, handy for the hunter to follow and for the flushed grouse to cross in a split second. The question is whether the bird and the gun agree on how a second should be split. If they do not, the next deer that passes finds a pair of empty shells to sniff at, but no feathers. Higher up the creeklet I encounter an abandoned farm. I try to read, from the age of the young jack pines marching across an old field, how long ago the luckless farmer found out that sand plains were meant to grow solitude, not corn. Jack pines tell tall tales to the unwary, for they put on several whorls of branches each year instead of only one. I find a better chronometer in an elm seedling that now blocks the barn door. It dates back to the drought of 1930. Since that year, no man has carried milk out of his barn. I wonder what this family thought about when their mortgage finally outgrew their crops and thus gave the signal for their eviction. Many thoughts, like flying grouse, leave no trace of their passing, but some leave clues that outlast the decades. He who in some unforgotten April planted this lilac must have thought pleasantly of blooms for all the Aprils to come. She who used the washboard, its corrugations worn thin with many Mondays, may have wished for a cessation of all Mondays, and soon. Musing on such questions, I had become aware of the dog down by the spring, pointing patiently these many minutes. I walk up, apologizing for my inattention. Up twitters a woodcock, bat-like, his salmon breast soaked in October sun. Thus goes the hunt. It's hard on such a day to keep one's mind on grouse, for there are many distractions. I cross a buck track in the sand and follow it in idle curiosity. The track leads straight from one Jersey tea bush to another, with nipped twigs showing why. This reminds me of my own lunch, but before I get it pulled out of my game pocket, I see a circling hawk, high skyward, needing identification. I wait till he banks and shows his red tail. I reach again for a little lunch, but my eye catches a peeled popple. Here a buck has rubbed off his itchy velvet. How long ago? The exposed wood is already brown. I conclude that horns must therefore be clean by now. I reach again for the lunch, but I'm interrupted by an excited yowp from the dog and a crash of bushes in the swamp. Out springs a buck, flag aloft, horns shining, his cloak still a sleek blue. Yes, the popple told the truth. This time I get the lunch all the way out and sit down to eat. The chickadee watches me and grows confidential about his lunch. He doesn't say what he ate. Perhaps it was a cool turgeon and eggs, or some other avian equivalent of cold roast grouse. Lunch over, I regard a phalanx of young tamaracks, their golden lances thrusting skyward. Under each, the needles of yesterday fall to earth, building a blanket of smoky gold. At the tip of each, the bud of tomorrow. Performed, poised, awaits another spring. Too early. Getting up early is a vice habitual in horned owls, stars, geese, and freight trains. Some hunters acquire it from geese, and some coffee pots from hunters. It is strange that in all the multitude of creatures who must rise in the morning at some time, only those few should have discovered the most pleasant and least useful time for doing it. Orion must have been the original mentor for the too early company, for it is he who signals for too early rising. It is time when Orion has passed west of the zenith about as far as one should lead a teal. Early risers feel at ease with each other, perhaps because, unlike those who sleep late, they are given to understatement of their own achievements. Orion, the most widely traveled, says literally nothing. The coffee pot, from its first soft gurgle, underclaims the virtues of what simmers within. The owl, in his trisyllabic commentary, plays down the story of the night's murders. The goose on the bar, rising briefly to a point of order in some inaudible and serene debate, lets fall no hint that he speaks with the authority of all the far hills and the sea. The freight, I admit, is hardly reticent about his own importance. Yet even he has a kind of modesty. His eye is single to his own noisy business, and he never comes roaring into somebody else's camp. I feel a deep security in this single-mindedness of freight trains. To arrive too early in the marsh is an adventure in pure listening. The ear roams at will among the noises of the night, without let or hindrance from hand or eye. When you hear a mallard being audibly enthusiastic about his soup, you are free to picture a score guzzling among some duckweeds. When one widgeon squeals, you may postulate a squadron without fear of visual contradiction. And when a flock of bluebills, pitching pondward, tears the dark silk of heaven in one long, rending nosedive, you catch your breath at the sound, but there is nothing to see except stars. The same performance in daytime would have to be looked at, shot at, missed, and then hurriedly fitted into an alibi. Nor could daylight add anything to your mind's eye picture of quivering wings ripping the firmament neatly into halves. The hour of listening ends when the fowl depart on muted wings for wider, safer waters, each flock a blur against the graying east. Like many another treaty of restraint, the pre-dawn pact lasts only as long as darkness humbles the arrogant. It would seem as if the sun were responsible for the daily retreat of reticence from the world. At any rate, by the time the mists are white over the lowlands, every rooster is bragging ad lib, and every corn shock is pretending to be twice as tall as any corn that ever grew. By sunup, every squirrel is exaggerating some fancied indignity to his person, and every jaw proclaiming with false emotion about supposititious dangers to society, at this very moment discovered by him. Distant crows are berating a hypothetical owl just to tell the world how vigilant crows are, and a pheasant cock, musing perhaps on his philanderings of bygone days, beats the air with his wings and tells the world in raucous warning that he owns this marsh and all the hens in it. Nor are all these illusions of grandeur confined to the birds and beasts. By breakfast time come the honks, horns, shouts, and whistles of the awakened farmyard, and finally, at evening, the drone of an unintended radio. Then everybody goes to bed to relearn the lessons of the night. Red lanterns. One way to hunt partridge is to make a plan based on logic and probabilities of the terrain to be hunted. This will take you over ground where the birds ought to be. Another way is to wander, quite aimlessly, from one red lantern to another. This will likely take you where the birds actually are. The lanterns are blackberry leaves, red in October sun. Red lanterns have lighted my way on many a pleasant hunt in many a region, but I think that blackberries must first have learned how to glow in the small counties of central Wisconsin. Along the little boggy streams of these friendly wastes, called poor by those who own lights barely flicker, the blackberries burn richly red on every sunny day from first frost to the last day of the season. Every woodcock and every partridge has his private solarium under these briars. Most hunters, not knowing this, wear themselves out in the briarless scrub, and returning home birdless, leave the rest to us in peace. By us, I mean the birds, the stream, the dog, and myself. The stream is a lazy one. He winds through the alders as if he would rather stay here than reach the river. So would I. Every one of his hairpin hesitations means that much more stream bank where hillside briars adjoin dank beds of frozen ferns and jewelweeds on the boggy bottom. No partridge can long absent himself from such a place, nor can I. Partridge hunting, then, is creekside stroll, upwind, from one briar patch to another. The dog, when he approaches the briars, looks around to make sure I am within gunshot. Reassured, he advances with stealthy caution, his wet nose screening 100 scents for that one scent, the potential presence of which gives life and meaning to the whole landscape. He is the prospector of the air, perpetually searching its strata for olfactory gold, partridge scent in the gold standard that relates his world to mine. My dog, by the way, thinks I have much to learn about partridges, and being a professional naturalist, I agree. He persists in tutoring me, with the calm patience of a professor of logic, in the art of drawing deductions from an educated nose. I delight in seeing him deduce a conclusion, in the form of a point, from data that are obvious to him, but speculative to my unaided eye. Perhaps he hopes his dull pupil will one day learn to smell. Like other dull pupils, I know when the professor is right, even though I do not know why. I check my gun and walk in. Like any good professor, the dog never laughs when I miss, which is often. He gives me just one look and proceeds up the stream in quest of another grouse. Following one of these banks, one walks astride to landscapes the hillside ones hunt from, and the bottom the dog hunts in. There is a special charm in treading soft, dry carpets of lycopodium to flush birds out of the bog. And the first test of a partridge dog is his willingness to do the wet work while you parallel him on the dry bank. A special problem arises when the belt of alders widens and the dog disappears from view. Hurry at once to a knoll on point, where you stand stock still, straining eye and ear to follow the dog. A sudden scattering of white throats may reveal his whereabouts. Again you may hear him breaking a twig, or splashing in a wet spot, or plopping into the creek. When all sound ceases, be ready for instant action, for he is likely on point. Listen now for the premonitory clucks of a frightened partridge gives just before flushing. Then follows the hurtling bird, or perhaps two of them, or I have known as many as 6, clucking and flushing one by one, each sailing high for his own destination in the uplands. Whether one passes within gunshot is, of course, a matter of chance, and you can compute the chance if you have time. 360 degrees divided by 30, or whatever segment of the circle your gun covers. Divide again by 3 or 4, which is your chance of missing, and you have the probability of actual feathers in the hunting coat. The second test of a good partridge dog is whether he reports for orders after such an episode. Sit down and talk it over with him while he pants. Then look for the next red lantern and proceed with the hunt. The October breeze brings my dog many scents other than grouse, each of which may lead to its own peculiar episode. When he points with a certain humorous expression of his ears, I know he has found a bedded rabbit. Once a dead serious point yielded no bird, but still the dog stood frozen. In a tuft of sedge under his very nose was a fat, sleeping coon, getting his share of October sun. At least once each hunt, the dog bays a skunk, usually in some denser-than-ordinary thicket of blackberries. Once the dog pointed in midstream. A whir of wings upriver, followed by 3 musical cries, told me that he had interrupted a wood duck's dinner. Not infrequently he finds jacksnipe in heavily pastured alders, and lastly he may put out a deer, bedded for the day on a high stream bank flanked by alder bog. Has the deer a poetical weakness for singing waters, or a practical liking for the bed that cannot be approached without making a noise? Judging by the indignant flick of his great white flag, it might be either or both. At sunset on the last day of the grouse season, every blackberry blows out its light. I do not understand how a mere bush can thus be infallibly informed about the Wisconsin statutes, nor have I ever gone back the next day to find out. For the ensuing 11 months, the lanterns glow only in recollection. I sometimes think that the other months were constituted mainly as a fitting interlude between Octobers, and I suspect that dogs, and perhaps grouse, share the same view.